My mother glanced down at my suitcase and smirked. "We won't miss you." I just nodded. Long past flinching at nights where my stepfather threw anything within his reach. I was leaving that house in Haven Ridge only to land in a cookie-cutter paradise where a woman just like him controlled the budgets, the lawns, and the lives. My name is Tess Ridley and I am 33 years old. The Monday morning air on Evergreen Lane was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and impending fines, a familiar dampness that seemed to seep through the thin fabric of my old corporate blazer. Clung to everything, a permanent feature of Evergreen Estates. My suitcase, a cheap polyester thing I'd bought for a business trip 5 years ago, scraped against the cracked concrete of the front walk. One of its wheels was jammed, wobbling uselessly and forcing the entire bag off balance. Much like I felt, each jarring bump up the walkway sent a small, dull tremor up my arm. I stopped at the foot of the 3 porch steps, taking a moment to steady my grip, to steady myself. The house was silent, but it was a heavy silence, the kind that follows a storm, filled with the ghosts of shouted words and the sharp crack of breaking objects. She was leaning against the doorframe just as I knew she would be. My mother, her body wrapped in a silk floral robe that was too elegant for the peeling paint of the porch, watched my struggle with the suitcase. A small, tight smile played on her lips, a familiar expression of faint amusement and profound disappointment. It was the smile she wore when I brought home a B+ instead of an A. The smile she wore when I tripped at my high school graduation. The smile she wore last night as Warren's voice climbed higher and higher. "We won't miss you," she said. Her voice was light, conversational, as if she were commenting on the weather. The words didn't land like a blow. I was too calloused for that. They landed like a confirmation, a final, neat closing entry in a long and painful ledger. Behind her, in the dim light of the hallway, Warren Dale's form was a hulking shadow. He was my stepfather, a man built of suppressed rage and cheap whiskey. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a restless energy still humming off him from the night before. His thick forearm resting on my mother's shoulder was a road map of angry red scratches. I didn't know if they were from her nails trying to hold him back or from his own fist connecting with the drywall beside my bedroom door. I didn't look at him directly. I had learned years ago that eye contact was an invitation, a challenge he was always eager to accept. Instead, I focused on the space between them, the safe, neutral territory. I calculated the distance from the porch steps to my car. A manageable distance. I had become an expert in measuring such things. My hand was steady as I reached into my pocket and pulled out the house key. The metal was cold against my palm. I didn't walk up the steps to hand it to her. That would have closed the distance, breached the perimeter I so carefully maintained. Instead, I reached out and placed it on the wide, weathered porch railing next to a terracotta pot of dead geraniums. The small metallic click was louder than her words had been. "Keep it," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the tremor I felt in my bones. It was a simple statement, but it meant more. Keep the key. Keep the house. Keep the misery that lived inside it. I was forfeiting my claim, severing the last flimsy tie. In my mind, I didn't just hear the click of the key on the wood. I heard the heavy thud of a vault door swinging shut, sealing them inside, sealing me out. It was the only closure I would ever get and the only one I needed. I turned without another word and walked the 34 feet to my car. The broken wheel on the suitcase scraped a long, mournful line in the damp pavement. My 2008 Civic, with its mismatched side mirror and a permanent dent in the passenger door, was an extension of my life here, functional, but damaged. It started on the second try, the engine catching with a rattling cough that shuddered through the driver's seat. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. The image of my mother's smirk and Warren's shadowy presence was permanently etched into my memory, filed away for future reference. I flipped on the radio, needing to fill the sudden, cavernous silence of the car. A slick, professional voice cut through the static. A landmark day for Claymant's newest gated community. The grand opening of Evergreen Estates signals a new era of suburban harmony in the region. A dry, mirthless smile touched my own lips. Evergreen Estates, my new address, my escape hatch. The community, a monument of manicured lawns and identical beige houses, was the polar opposite of the decaying two-story house on Alder Street. It was clean, powerful, and brutally impersonal. And it was my chance. A chance to stop being the family's charity case. The useless daughter my mother so often lamented to her friends over wine. Always within my earshot, Warren called me a leech, a drain on his resources, conveniently forgetting the accounting scholarship that had paid my way through a degree he dismissed as being counting. This move, this community, was my opportunity to finally prove them wrong. Not for their approval, but for my own vindication. It was a new arena with new rules, and I was determined to master them. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A message from my mother. I glanced at the screen. Don't embarrass the family. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost breathtaking. Embarrass them by taking a respectable job as the new HOA financial coordinator, by quietly removing myself from their toxic orbit, or by simply existing in a way that no longer served their narrative of benevolent caretakers burdened by a difficult child. My fingers moved with practiced precision. I took a screenshot of the message. The screen flashed, capturing her words, the timestamp, her contact name. I opened a folder on my phone, one I had created a long time ago. It was labeled simply receipts. It was full of them. Screenshots of texts, photos of bruises I'd claimed were from being clumsy, scanned copies of checks I'd written to them for rent that was triple the market rate. It was my private, meticulous archive of injustice. This latest entry fit perfectly. I pulled away from the curb, the Civic's worn tires crunching over wet leaves. In the rearview mirror, the house on Alder Street shrank, becoming just another anonymous facade in a town I was desperate to forget. The radio announcer continued to praise the architectural marvel of Evergreen Estates, his voice dripping with admiration for the power and money it represented. A vow, cold and hard, formed in my throat. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a calculated decision, a strategic plan solidifying in the quiet of my car. They had built their lives on a foundation of intimidation and emotional violence, a cycle that had trapped me for decades. Warren used his fists and his voice. My mother used her silence and her smiles. They were two sides of the same brutal coin. I would end it. I would break the cycle, but I wouldn't use their methods. My weapons wouldn't be fists or shouted words or broken plates. My weapons would be spreadsheets and audit trails, policies and procedures. I would not fight them with chaos. I would dismantle them with order. I would end this cycle of violence, not with punches, but with clauses. I drove toward the highway, toward the distant silhouette of the gated entrance against the gray sky, and I did not look back. The townhouse in Evergreen Estates was aggressively neutral. Its walls were the color of weak tea. The carpet was a non-committal beige, and the single large window framed a view that was anything but neutral. The HOA Welcome Center. It stood less than a mile away, a shard of white stucco and enforced perfection that speared the perpetually overcast sky. It didn't just occupy the entrance. It owned it. From my small empty room on the ground floor of a much humbler unit, the Welcome Center was a constant, silent observer, a reminder that power didn't need a heart. It just needed a sufficiently strict set of bylaws. My belongings were contained in 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. As I unpacked, the hollow echo of the room amplified every small sound. The rip of packing tape, the soft thud of clothes being placed in a drawer. There were no photographs to put on the bare walls. I owned none. The official family album curated by my mother was a masterwork of fiction. On the living room wall back in Haven Ridge, there is a large gilt-framed photograph from a Thanksgiving 3 years ago. This meant to project warmth, a tableau of familial bliss. My mother is smiling, a glass of white wine held delicately in her hand. Warren is beside her, his arm draped possessively over her shoulder. A broad, satisfied grin on his face that never quite reached his eyes. And then there's me. I'm at the far end of the table, partially obscured by the glare of an ornate table lamp. My face is a blur of shadow and light, my features indistinct. It's the perfect representation of my role in their lives. Present, but not seen. A necessary prop to complete the picture of a happy family, but one they preferred to keep out of focus, relegated to the dim edges. Warren's bad temper, as my mother called it, had started when I was 15. It began not with a bang, but with a tightening of the air in the house, a sudden, terrifying stillness that preceded the storm. The first time it was over a misplaced remote control. His voice, a low rumble at first, escalated into a roar that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. A vase, a wedding gift to my mother from her own parents, was swept from the mantelpiece. It didn't just break. It exploded. Later, as I was sweeping up the porcelain shards, my hands trembling, my mother came into the room. She wouldn't look at the empty space on the mantel. She looked at me instead, her expression a careful mixture of apology and warning. "He has a bad temper," she whispered as if sharing a profound secret. "You just have to learn not to provoke him." The blame so subtly was shifted. It wasn't his rage that was the problem. It was my existence, my potential to provoke. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, to navigate the house like a ghost, mastering the art of being blurry long before that Thanksgiving photograph was ever taken. The only personal item I unpacked with any sense of ceremony was a small black hardbound notebook. It was a simple ledger with ruled pages for dates, descriptions, and amounts. It was the one thing I had kept, the one thing that was truly mine. The habit had started as a necessity, a survival tactic. When I was 16, I needed to save money for a bus ticket to a debate tournament 2 towns over. I hid the cash, a collection of 1s and 5s earned from odd jobs, inside an old textbook. Warren found it. He claimed it was his, that I had stolen it from his wallet. The argument was short and one-sided. He took the money. My mother stood in the doorway and said nothing. After that, I never kept cash. Instead, I became obsessed with tracking it. I recorded every dollar I earned, every penny I was forced to spend. The notebook became my silent witness, an incorruptible record of what was mine. It was a habit born of fear that had evolved into a discipline of precision. When I won the accounting scholarship to the state university, I thought for a fleeting, naive moment that it might change things, that it might be a source of pride. At a family barbecue that summer, I overheard my mother talking to my aunt. "Warren is so good to us," she said, her voice filled with a practiced wheelie devotion. "He works so hard to provide for this family." My aunt glanced over at me, flipping burgers at the grill. "And Tess is so smart getting that scholarship." My mother waved a dismissive hand. "It's a help, I suppose. It's not like she was contributing anything before." The words were a clean, sharp cut. My achievement was framed not as a success, but as the partial repayment of a debt I never knew I owed. My scholarship wasn't my triumph. It was merely a lessening of their burden. Warren, standing nearby with a beer in his hand, just grunted in agreement. That was the day I truly understood. My value in that house was not measured by my character or my intelligence, but by my cost. I was an expense line item they resented. And so I dedicated myself to my studies with a singular cold focus. Accounting wasn't just a subject. It was a language of power. the underlying grammar of the world that Warren and men like him worshipped. I learned about ledgers and liabilities, assets and audits. I learned that numbers don't have emotions. They don't have bad tempers. They simply are. And they can be used to expose the truth. So, I applied for the job in the Internal Controls Department at the Evergreen Estates HOA Management Office in Claymont, 100 miles away from Haven Ridge. When I got the offer, I felt a flicker of something that might have been joy, but it was quickly replaced by a quiet, determined calm. I told my mother I was moving out. Her only response, delivered via text message a day later, was the one I had screenshotted in the car. Try not to cause trouble. I sat down at the cheap particle board desk that came with the furnished townhouse. I opened my black ledger, my book of receipts. On the inside cover beneath my own name, I wrote her words down in neat block letters. Goal 1. Cause trouble in the right place. It wasn't a mission statement born of anger. It was a strategic objective. Trouble in my world wasn't about shouting or breaking things. It was about finding the inconsistencies, the rounding errors in the grand narrative, the fabricated entries in the official record. It was about asking the questions no one else wanted to ask. I looked out the window again. The Evergreen Estates Welcome Center was beginning to light up as the afternoon faded into a dusky gray. Floor by floor, windows blinked on, revealing the clean, orderly world within. A world of rules, of systems, of controls. A world where a man like Warrendale, with his blustering rage and casual cruelty, should not be able to thrive. But I knew better. Men like him were everywhere. They just wore better suits. Their rage sublimated into hostile takeovers and ruthless downsizing. They broke lives instead of vases. The silence in my townhouse was absolute. For the first time in as long as I could remember, there was no tension coiling in my stomach. No subconscious listening for the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs. No bracing for the slam of a door. The only sound was the gentle, consistent hum of the small air purifier I had set up in the corner. It was a quiet mechanical whir, a sound that promised nothing but clean air, and in doing so, delivered more than any human promise I had ever received. That sound, that steady, reliable hum was the sound of freedom. And in that quiet, sterile space, with the HOA office of my future standing sentinel outside my window, I began to prepare for my first day of causing the right kind of trouble. The inside of the Evergreen Estates HOA office was like the inside of a server farm, chilled, silent, and ruthlessly efficient. There were no personal photos on the desks, no cheerful coffee mugs. Everything was brushed white stucco, frosted glass, and the muted gray of the corporate carpet. My cubicle on the ground floor was a sterile box with a view of neighboring identical townhouses. It was perfect. It was anonymous. For the first 2 weeks, I kept my head down, learned the proprietary HOA accounting software, and drank the bitter free coffee, feeling the ghosts of Alder Street begin to recede. I was a number, an employee ID, and for the first time in my life, that felt like a promotion. My first major task was to familiarize myself with the association's internal structure and key personnel ahead of the quarterly review. I pulled up the official organizational chart on my monitor. The document was a neat, sterile pyramid of names and titles. At the top, as expected, was Marshall Concade, board treasurer. A step below him, Elena Voss, HOA president. Then I saw it. Under a newly created advisory branch linked directly to the president's office was a title and a name that made the air freeze in my lungs. Strategic Consultant for Vendor Optimization. The name was Warrendale. The hot coffee I had just sipped scalded the back of my throat. I choked. A sharp, ragged cough that echoed in the cathedral-like quiet of the office floor. A few heads popped up from neighboring cubicles, annoyed eyes peering over the low partitions before dismissing me and returning to their screens. I grabbed a tissue, wiping the brown spatter from my monitor. But my hand was shaking. Couldn't be. It was a common enough name. It had to be a coincidence. Haven Ridge was 100 miles away, a world away. He was a small-time residential contractor, not a high-level HOA consultant. The following morning, an all-staff email landed in my inbox. Subject: welcoming new strategic talent. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. The professionally smiling photo of Elena Voss was at the top. Team, please join me in welcoming Warren Dale to Evergreen Estates. As our new strategic consultant for vendor optimization, Warren will be instrumental in streamlining our procurement processes and maximizing cost efficiencies with our external partners. His extensive experience in contract negotiation will be a tremendous asset. There was no photo of him. There didn't need to be. His name appearing in the clean corporate font of my inbox felt like a contamination. It was a dark, ugly stain spreading across the pristine white page of my new life. The monster I had fled had not only followed me, he had somehow gotten here first and was waiting at a desk on a higher floor. The system I had trusted to be my sanctuary was already compromised. Darkness wasn't just entering the room. It owned the gate. My professional training took over. A cold, logical process that suppressed the panic. Emotion was a liability. Data was truth. I closed the email and opened the vendor payment portal. My job was internal controls. It was time to control. I started with a simple cross-reference. Purchase orders against invoices for the last 2 quarters. The work was tedious, methodical, and deeply calming. It was a world of pure logic, of matching numbers and codes. For hours, there was nothing. Then I found the first one. An invoice from Apex Landscaping paid for a project at the community pool. The PO was approved by a mid-level manager. Everything looked clean, but the mailing address on the invoice was a UPS store number. A minor anomaly, but a thread. I pulled on it. I searched the system for other vendors using UPS store boxes. I found 3 more, then 8. By the end of the day, I had a list of 12 separate contracting and supply companies, all with unique names: Ridgeline Materials, Keystone Contracting, Summit Logistics, but they all shared 2 things in common. First, their payments were all directed to LLCs registered within the last year. Second, their physical address for correspondence was the exact same UPS box in a town just outside Haven Ridge. I ran a check on the delivery receipts. The signature for all 12 companies, a looping, illegible scrawl, was identical. My next step was to examine the revenue side. Evergreen Estates, like most large HOAs, collected monthly assessments and offered rebates for early payments or high-volume maintenance orders. I found an entry in the Q2 financials that caught my eye. A line item for $4.8 million labeled Accelerated Rebate Accrual. It was a significant sum, enough to tip the quarterly budget from a slight miss to a solid beat. Pleasing the board, but revenue recognition rules are strict. You cannot book revenue until the terms of the deal are irrevocably met. I started digging into the contracts associated with that accrual. The agreements weren't just incomplete. Several of them hadn't even been signed by the vendors yet. Evergreen had booked $4.8 million in phantom income based on deals that were still just hopeful negotiations. It was aggressive accounting at best, outright fraud at worst. The final piece of the puzzle was the most chilling. I requested the system access logs for the finance department servers, specifically for the 24-hour period surrounding the Q2 closing. The logs tracked every single action, every login, every file access, every entry modification. They were a digital trail of breadcrumbs. As I scrolled through the timestamps for the final hour before the books were officially closed, I found a gap. At 11:40 p.m., the log showed routine activity. The next entry was timestamped 11:57 p.m. 17 minutes had vanished. The logs hadn't just been altered. A section had been professionally excised, clipped out with a level of surgical skill that suggested deep system knowledge. It was the digital equivalent of wiping fingerprints from a crime scene. Someone with high-level privileges had been in the system during those 17 minutes doing something they did not want recorded. My course of action was clear. I spent the next 2 days drafting a concise factual risk memorandum. I attached the list of the 12 shell company vendors. I included the analysis of the $4.8 million rebate accrual, citing the specific accounting principles that had been violated. I highlighted the 17-minute gap in the access logs. I presented no theories, no accusations. I just presented the data. I addressed it to Elena Voss, marked it as high priority, and clicked send. The response came 24 hours later. It was a single sentence. Tess, thank you for the diligence. Let's table this for review next month. Table this, the corporate euphemism for bury this. I read the sentence 5 times. It wasn't a dismissal. It was an instruction. She wasn't ignoring the risk. She was acknowledging it and ordering me to do the same. The confirmation of my deepest fears came the following afternoon. I was deep in a spreadsheet trying to trace the payment routing for Apex Landscaping when a shadow fell over my desk. I smelled him before I saw him. The faint cloying scent of an expensive but cheap-smelling cologne he always wore. I see. I looked up slowly. Warren Dale stood beside my cubicle, his bulk filling the narrow space. He was wearing a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than my car. He had the same predatory smile, the same deadness in his eyes. It was the smile he wore just before his temper broke. Warren, I said, my voice a flat, steady line. I refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing me tremble. He leaned forward, placing one meaty hand on the low wall of my cubicle, a casual gesture of ownership. He surveyed my workspace, the dual monitors, the neat stacks of files, the company-issued pen holder. Good to see you landing on your feet, he said, his voice a low, confidential rumble. Your mother was worried. I said nothing. I just stared at the cursor blinking on my screen. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You know, she's doing much better now. Less stress around the house. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air between us. Then he delivered the final chilling blow. How are things with your mother back home? The question was a perfectly crafted weapon. It was innocuous to anyone who might overhear, but to me, it was a clear and brutal message. I know you're here. I'm in charge now. Your past is not the past. I can reach out and touch it. And you, anytime I want. A cold dread colder than any I had felt before washed over me. This wasn't a coincidence. He was here because of me, or I was here because of him. The distinction no longer mattered. He pushed himself off the cubicle wall. Keep up the good work, Tess, he said, and walked away, his expensive shoes silent on the corporate carpet. I sat there for a full minute, my hands frozen on my keyboard. The office, my sanctuary of sterile order, suddenly felt like a cage. This wasn't just about HOA fraud anymore. This wasn't about exposing a financial crime to get a promotion or prove a point. This was about him. He had found me. He had cornered me in a gated paradise of stucco and rules, and he was reminding me that no matter how high I climbed, he would always be standing above me. My gaze fell upon my bag at my feet. Inside was the small black ledger, my book of receipts, my private record of a different kind of debt. With a sudden, deliberate movement, I reached down, took out the notebook, and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. I turned the small key and the lock made a sharp, definitive click. The battle had followed me from the cracked porch of Alder Street to the ground floor of Evergreen Estates. This was no longer a job. It was survival. Warren's visit didn't break me. It focused me. The fear was a cold, clarifying liquid that washed away all hesitation. Panic is a storm, loud and chaotic. What I felt now was the quiet, unnerving calm at its eye. In that sterile cubicle, surrounded by the hum of servers and the silent flow of assessments, I realized the rules of the game. He thought he could intimidate me, that the old fear from the house on Alder Street would paralyze me. He was wrong. He had brought the fight into my arena. Here, I made the rules. My work for the next 3 weeks became a quiet obsession, conducted in the deep hours of the night. Long after the office had emptied, I framed my project under the benign heading of proactive governance enhancements. HOA language was the perfect camouflage. It was bland, impenetrable, and no one ever read the fine print. My first construction was the Vendor Integrity Check Protocol. It was a digital fortress built on a foundation of simple, verifiable truths. I presented it not as a new system but as an automated update to the existing procurement software. It was designed to be elegant, efficient, and non-negotiable. Every new and existing vendor in the system would be subject to a mandatory 3-tiered verification process upon the submission of any invoice over a trivial threshold. Tier 1 was physical address validation. My code would ping a commercial geodatabase to cross-reference the listed business address. It would automatically flag any address corresponding to a known mail forwarding service, VO, box, or a UPS store. The system wouldn't block payment, but it would attach a permanent non-removable red flag to the vendor's profile, requiring a director-level override for every subsequent transaction. Warren's 12 shell companies would light up like a Christmas tree. Tier 2 was Federal Employer Identification Number, EIN, authentication. The system would perform a real-time check against the IRS database. Any discrepancy between the vendor name on the invoice and the name registered to the EIN would freeze the payment instantly. This was a non-overridable hard stop. A shell company might be able to fake an address, but it couldn't fake a federal tax ID without committing a felony visible to the system. Tier 3 was IP geolocation and signature analysis for all electronically submitted invoices. Every digital submission carries metadata. My module would capture the IP address of the device that submitted the invoice. If multiple invoices from supposedly separate companies originated from the same IP address within a short time frame, they would be flagged for collusive submission. Furthermore, it would analyze the digital signature on the documents. The looping identical scrawl I'd found on the delivery receipts would now be scanned and cross-referenced by a pattern recognition algorithm. Multiple vendors, one signature, one IP address, an undeniable trifecta of fraud. Next, I tackled the problem of the missing 17 minutes. I developed a process I called document integrity watermarking. It sounded impressive and technical, which was the point. In reality, it was a simple but powerful application of cryptographic hashing. Upon finalization, every sensitive financial document, invoices, quarterly reports, internal memos would have a checksum watermark embedded in its PDF metadata. This watermark was a unique alphanumeric string, a digital fingerprint generated from the document's exact contents at that specific moment. If anyone, even a system administrator with the highest privileges, altered so much as a comma or a single pixel, the checksum would no longer match the original. The document wouldn't be deleted. Instead, a permanent visible banner would appear at the top of the file in all subsequent viewings. This document has been modified since its last official validation. It was a digital scar, a public brand of tampering that could never be erased. These two systems were the walls and the alarms. But I still needed the weapon. I found it in the dense, unread pages of the association's official corporate governance and risk management policy. It was a 100-page document that every board member electronically signed, but no one ever read. I submitted a draft for an update to Section 4, Subsection B, Escalation Procedures for Internal Control Flags. My additions were buried on page 73, written in the driest legalese I could muster. I named it the Reverse Exposure Clause. The clause was simple in its lethality. It stated that when a financial risk or irregularity was formally flagged by the Internal Controls Department to a senior executive, specifically naming the HOA president, that executive had a standard review period of 14 business days to formally respond or open an investigation. If, at the end of that 14-day period, the flag remained unaddressed and the system registered a deferred or tabled status on the item, a pre-programmed automated protocol would be initiated. This protocol would compile all data related to the original flag, my complete memorandum, the vendor lists, the revenue recognition analysis, the log gap report into a single encrypted package. That package would then be automatically and simultaneously distributed to the internal independent audit committee of the board of directors, to every homeowner via the community portal, and to the primary point of contact at Evergreen's corporate liability and D&O insurance provider. 14 days. It was the perfect length of time. Short enough to create urgency, but long enough to seem like a reasonable grace period, making it impossible to argue against as an unfair gotcha. Deferring a problem would no longer bury it. It would arm it. The trigger had to be invisible, an action the target would take willingly. In the risk management software, I created a new, seemingly helpful feature. When an executive reviewed a flagged item, they now had a button labeled Acknowledge and Defer. Clicking it would open a text box allowing them to add a note. Notes for Elena explaining why the review was being pushed. It looked like a tool for organization for busy executives to manage their workflow. But the moment Elena Voss typed into that box and hit save, her action of deferral would become a data point. The system would log her command, and on a hidden server, a clock would begin to count down from 14. To build in redundancy, I reached out to an old friend from college, a brilliant coder named Ben, who now worked in Evergreen's DevSecOps division. We'd spent countless nights fueled by caffeine and pizza, debating the ethics of corporate data security. I told him I was wargaming a worst-case scenario for a compliance stress test. He owed me a favor from a particularly difficult advanced database theory class. I asked him to insert a simple webhook into the automated email alert system. A webhook is a silent listener. If the system ever generated an alert containing the specific keywords reverse exposure clause, audit committee, and insurer, the webhook would trigger. It would silently forward a blind carbon copy of the entire data package to a secure encrypted email address I had set up months before, bl213@proton.me. The BL stood for Baker Lind, a small but notoriously aggressive forensic accounting and law firm I had researched extensively. The final piece was physical. Digital records could be wiped. Servers could be destroyed. I printed hard copies of everything. My original memo, the vendor spreadsheets with the UPS box address highlighted, screenshots of the unsigned rebate agreements, the text message from my mother, and a full printout of the updated policy containing my clause. I placed everything in a thick manila envelope, sealed it, and took a trip downtown during my lunch break to Harbor Trust, a quiet old money bank. I rented a safe deposit box. The box number was 213. The attendant left me alone in the sterile, silent vault. The heavy steel door slid open with a satisfying thud. I placed the envelope inside next to the small black ledger I had brought from home. I closed the door, turned the 2 keys, and felt the tumblers fall into place. Every step was taken with cold, deliberate precision. I submitted the policy update through the general anonymous portal. The author was logged simply as Policy Team. My vendor integrity check and document watermarking updates were bundled with a dozen other minor software patches. Their true purpose hidden in plain sight. I never wanted the credit. Credit created a target. I wanted the system itself to be the author of their downfall. I wanted the records to show that Elena Voss herself started the clock. I wanted the logs to show that Warren's own digital fingerprints were on the invoices. I didn't want to be the one who pushed them. I wanted to build a perfectly balanced platform and let them with their own greed and arrogance. Step onto it and find it was a trapdoor. I had built the machine. Now all I had to do was wait for them to turn it on. The invitation arrived not as a phone call, but as a calendar appointment in my Outlook. It was from Karen Langley. From the board's executive assistant. Subject: Strategic Leadership Dinner. The required attendees were Marshall Kincaid, Elena Voss, and Tess Ridley. The location was Canto, a restaurant on the 44th floor of a rival skyscraper, a place known for its panoramic views and astronomical prices. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Declining was not an option. I spent an hour getting ready, not out of vanity, but out of a need for armor. I chose a severe charcoal gray dress, plain black heels, and pulled my hair back into a tight, unforgiving knot. I wore no jewelry. My face was a neutral mask. I was dressing not for dinner, but for combat. The elevator ride to the 44th floor was a silent, pressurized descent. When the doors opened, I was met with a wall of glass, the lights of Claymont sprawling below like a fallen constellation. The restaurant was a hushed, opulent space, all dark wood and soft lighting. Warren, Marshall, and Elena were already at a corner table, a prime piece of real estate overlooking the city. They looked up as I approached, their conversation halting. "Tess, glad you could make it," Marshall said, his treasurer's smile perfectly in place. He stood, a gesture of politeness that felt like a strategic maneuver. Elena merely nodded, her eyes cool and assessing. Warren remained seated, watching me, a faint smirk playing on his lips. But there was a fourth person at the table, her back to me. As I drew closer, she turned. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mother. She was wearing a new dress, a deep sapphire blue silk that must have cost a fortune. Her hair was professionally styled, and she wore the diamond earrings Warren had given her for their last anniversary. And she was wearing her perfume. It was a heavy floral scent, one I hadn't smelled in years, but would never forget. It was the scent she always put on before going out. On the nights she knew Warren had been drinking, the nights she would close and lock her bedroom door, leaving the rest of the house to the mercy of his temper. The scent wasn't just perfume. It was the smell of abandonment. "Tess, darling," she said, her voice a little too bright. Warren thought it would be a wonderful surprise. A little family dinner to celebrate your success. I didn't answer. I just looked at Warren. The surprise wasn't for me. It was for him. He had brought her here as a tool, a living, breathing reminder of the world I came from, of the power he still held over it, and by extension over me. I took my seat, the thick upholstery of the chair feeling like a trap. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant clink of other people's silverware. My mother, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant of the tension, began to speak. "You should be so grateful, Tess," she said, placing a manicured hand on my arm. Her touch felt like a brand. "Elena has done so much for you, getting you this opportunity. She's really looking out for you, helping your career." I looked from her smiling face to Elena's smug one. Helping my career. The lie was so audacious, so complete that I felt a strange sense of calm descend upon me. They were playing a game, and they had just revealed their strategy. They thought this was about family, about gratitude, about the old dynamics of guilt and obligation. Marshall, ever the smooth treasurer, seized the opening. He leaned forward, creating an illusion of intimacy. "We're all a family here at Evergreen Estates, Tess. And sometimes in a family, we need to be flexible, especially at the end of a quarter. We're projecting strong numbers, but to really hit the KPIs the board is expecting, we need a little creative energy. An analyst with your talent could probably find ways to make some slight adjustments to the revenue accruals. Nothing major, Of course, just optimizing the timeline. A slight adjustment. The phrase was so clean, so sterile. He was asking me to commit fraud, to personally sign off on the very $4.8 million in phantom income one had flagged. And he was doing it in front of my mother and the man who had terrorized my adolescence. I looked down at the table. It was made of thick black glass, polished to a mirror finish. In its dark surface, I could see my own reflection, distorted and elongated. But beneath my own face, I saw another one. The face of a 15-year-old girl sitting silently at a dinner table, her hands clenched in her lap, trying to make herself invisible, nimbly holding her breath and praying the storm wouldn't break tonight. For a second, the reflection was more real than the room. I felt the old familiar tightness in my chest. Then Elena spoke. She hadn't moved, but her voice cut through the air, low and sharp. She reached over and placed her hand on the back of my chair, inches from my shoulder. Her knuckles brushed against my dress. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was a cage being lowered. Listen to Marshall. Tess, she said softly. Don't cause any trouble. That was it. The core command that had governed my entire life. Don't provoke him. Don't make a scene. Don't cause trouble. The 15-year-old in the reflection flinched. But the woman sitting at the table did not. I lifted my head, my eyes meeting Elena across the table. The reflection in the black glass vanished, replaced by the clear, sharp reality of the present moment. I had caused trouble my entire life simply by existing. The difference was now I knew how to weaponize it. I don't cause trouble, Elena, I said. My voice was quiet, even, and carried across the table with absolute clarity. I document it. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. A sudden drop in pressure. Marshall's smile faltered. Elena, who had been silent the entire time, looked at me with a new sharp interest. My mother's face clouded with confusion. Warren's eyes narrowed, the smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of cold fury. He had expected fear, compliance, a retreat into the shell of the girl I used to be. He did not get it. The rest of the dinner was a pantomime of civility. The food came exquisite and tasteless. I moved it around my plate. My mother chattered nervously about the neighbors on Alder Street. Marshall talked about the stock market. Elena said nothing. Warren watched me, his silence a palpable threat. Finally, the waiter arrived with the bill, placing the leather folio in the center of the table. Marshall made a show of reaching for it. Allow me. This is a company expense. I've got it, Elena said, cutting him off. She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a wallet. She extracted a corporate credit card and tossed it into the folio. Put it on this. As the waiter walked away, I kept my eyes down, my focus entirely on that small piece of plastic she had left on the table. The card was a sleek metallic black. The name embossed on it was not Evergreen Estates. It was not Elena Voss. It was Haven Ridge Sourcing LLC, one of Warren's shell companies, one of the 12 vendors I had been investigating. She was paying for this power dinner. This attempted coercion with the money she was bleeding from the community. The audacity, the sheer arrogant stupidity of it was breathtaking. My heart was beating a hard, steady rhythm. I reached for my clutch on the table. I just have to check a message, I murmured, pulling out my phone. My hands were perfectly still under the cover of the table. I angled the phone upwards. I swiped to the camera, framing the credit card in the corner of the restaurant bill, which clearly showed the date and the name of the establishment. I didn't look at the screen. I just pressed the button. The phone vibrated almost imperceptibly in my hand. The picture was taken. I stood up. If you'll excuse me, I walked to the restroom, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Inside, under the harsh bright lights, I locked the door, leaned against the cold stone counter, and took a deep breath. I opened my phone. The image was clear. The name Haven Ridge Sourcing, perfectly legible. I attached the photo to a new email. The recipient was my private account. The subject line was one word, receipts. I hit send. The small whoosh of the sent email was the loudest sound in the world. I splashed cold water on my face, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The scared child from the tabletop was gone. In her place was a woman who had just loaded the gun. The air in the subterranean parking garage was cold and still, tasting of concrete dust and exhaust fumes. I walked toward my Civic, the sound of my sensible heels clicking a sharp, lonely rhythm in the echoing silence. I was halfway to my car when she moved. Elena stepped out from behind a thick concrete pillar, blocking my path. She wasn't wearing her suit jacket, just her crisp white blouse and pearls, the sleeves rolled up to her manicured forearms. She looked like she was ready for a fight. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was a low growl that didn't carry, meant only for me. "We have nothing to talk about," I replied, my own voice flat. I tried to step around her. She shifted her body, blocking me again, a predator cutting off an escape route. "You embarrassed me last night," she said. "You embarrassed your mother. You embarrassed the board. The only person who should be embarrassed is the one paying for a corporate dinner with a fraudulent vendor card," I said, not raising my voice. Her eyes went cold. The manufactured charm vanished, replaced by the familiar, ugly rage I knew so well from Warren's stories. "You're getting in over your head, Tess. You think you're smart with your little spreadsheets. You don't know the world you're playing in. You need to back off. This is your only warning. Don't cross the line." The line. She had drawn it in the sand my entire life. Don't talk back. Don't have an opinion. Don't exist too loudly. I was done staying behind her lines. I turned, feigning a move back the way I came, then cut sharply to my right, heading for the other side of the row of cars. I would take the long way around. I would not be cornered. Her footsteps followed, sharp designer heels on gritty concrete. They were faster now, deliberate, not a walk, but a pursuit. The sound echoed off the low ceiling, sounding closer than it was. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic trapped bird. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I kept walking, my pace quickening. The elevator bank was 50 feet ahead. The stairwell door was 20. Enough. I was done running, done being herded. I made a hard right turn away from the elevators and pushed the heavy metal bar on the fire escape door. The door hissed open and I stepped inside into the sterile fluorescent-lit stairwell. I let the door begin to swing shut behind me. I knew the layout of this building. There was a wide-angle security camera mounted high in the corner of this landing, covering the door. It was a silent, impartial witness. The door didn't close. It slammed back open, hitting the wall with a deafening bang. Elena filled the doorway, her face dark with fury. The heavy door swung shut behind her, sealing us in. The click of the lock was unnervingly loud. "You think you're clever?" she snarled, taking a step down toward me. I didn't answer. I just took one step down myself, placing my hand firmly on the cold, painted steel handrail. My knuckles were white. I was bracing myself. She came at me. It wasn't a punch. It was something worse, something more dismissive. A kick aimed not at me, but at my legs, meant to sweep me off my feet and send me tumbling down the concrete steps. A loud metallic clang reverberated through the stairwell as the toe of her expensive shoe connected hard with the steel baluster right beside my knee. The entire railing shuddered from the impact, the vibration jarring my arm all the way to my shoulder. But I didn't fall. My grip on the handrail held. I had been ready. My body absorbed the shock. My feet planted firm. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, ignoring her completely. I looked up past her enraged face and stared directly into the small black unblinking lens of the security camera. I held its gaze for 3 full seconds. I let it record my face. There was no fear there, only a cold, hard promise. She saw where I was looking. She froze, her rage momentarily replaced by a flicker of something else. Confusion. Realization. She had performed for an audience. She backed away, her face a mask of fury, and shoved the fire door open, disappearing back into the garage. I stayed there, my hand gripping the rail until the tremor in my arm subsided. Then I walked back out onto the garage floor, got in my car, and drove up to the ground level and out into the gray afternoon. Back at my desk. The adrenaline was still singing in my veins. My hands shook as I tried to move my mouse. I gripped the edge of my desk, focusing on the grain of the cheap laminate. I counted my breaths. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. The box breathing technique they teach you to control panic. It worked. The shaking subsided, replaced by an icy calm. Exactly 22 minutes after I sat down, the email arrived. It was from Human Resources. The subject line was chilling in its corporate blandness. Formal notice of suspension. The body of the email was short and brutal. Ms. Ridley. This serves as formal notification that you are suspended with pay. Effective immediately. This action is pending an investigation into formal complaints regarding gross insubordination and the creation of a hostile work environment. Please collect your personal belongings. Your system access will be revoked in 1 hour. They were fast. Faster than I could have imagined. She hadn't just run to HR. She had run to Marshall and Warren. They had fabricated a complaint, twisted the narrative, and were ejecting me before I could make a move. They thought they were cutting off the head of the snake. They didn't realize they were just giving me exactly what I needed. A reason. My fingers flew across the keyboard. There was no time to wait for Elena to act. I had to force her hand. I opened the risk management software and navigated to my memorandum. I clicked on it. The system, working as designed, presented the options. I clicked the button I had created, acknowledge and defer. The text box popped up. Notes for Elena. I typed a single sentence. Perfect piece of corporate fiction. Per President verbal instruction. Deferring review pending further strategic alignment in Q4. I was putting the words in her mouth, creating a digital record of an order she had essentially already given. It was a lie, but it was a lie that served the greater truth. I hit save. The system accepted the entry. A confirmation box appeared. Item status updated. Deferred by T. Ridley on behalf of E. Voss. Somewhere on a hidden server. A clock began to count down from 14. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I heard there was some trouble at work. Warren called. Tess. Why do you always have to make people dislike you? The blame automatic and reflexive. The familiar sting of it was gone, replaced by a weary finality. My thumbs moved quickly. I've chosen my side. I blocked her number. Next, a new email. I addressed it to the general HR inbox and my direct manager. Subject, request for medical leave. To whom it may concern, I wrote, effective immediately, I am requesting short-term medical leave due to acute workplace-induced stress and a hostile environment that has resulted in a direct physical threat from an HOA consultant. Please see attached file for reference. I will be seeking medical and legal counsel. The attachment was a single timestamped screenshot from the security footage. I had already emailed building security citing a minor fender bender and requesting a clip of the stairwell entrance. The image was grainy but clear enough. It showed Elena, her face contorted in a snarl, cornering me against the door. It was all I needed. I hit send. That night, in my silent townhouse, I walked over to the wall opposite my bed. I took a single clean sheet of white paper from my printer and a thick black marker. In the center of the page, I drew a large stark number 0. I taped the paper to the wall. Day 0, the start of the 14-day countdown. It would be the first thing I saw when I woke up and the last thing I saw before I closed my eyes. It was not a calendar. It was a promise. The first 6 days of my suspension passed in a state of suspended animation. My life was stripped down to a spare monastic routine. I woke up. I ran 5 miles along the Claymont waterfront, the cold air burning my lungs clean. I came home. I read dense books on corporate law and data forensics. And each night before I turned out the light, I took down the paper from the wall, crossed out the old number, and wrote the new one. The black marker made a satisfying squeaking sound on the clean white page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The numbers were my rosary beads. A countdown to a judgment day of my own making. I received no calls from Evergreen. My medical leave request, with its damning attachment, had clearly thrown them into a state of legal paralysis. They couldn't fire me, but they couldn't allow me back in the building. So, they did nothing, hoping I would simply go away. They didn't know I was a ghost already in their machine, patiently waiting. On the morning of day 7, my burner phone, a cheap prepaid device I kept for secure communications, vibrated on my kitchen counter. A single encrypted message from a contact labeled B, Ben from Dev Secretary Ops. The message was brief, a string of seemingly random characters that when decrypted read, "Test dye in the water lit up green. All clear." I deleted the message immediately. He was telling me that one of the Apex landscaping invoices, one of the core vendor frauds, had been accessed and altered. The alteration was microscopic, a change to a single byte in the deep metadata, invisible to any human eye. It was a test. Someone, probably in their IT department, was probing the files, maybe preparing to scrub them. But my document integrity watermarking had caught it the moment the file was saved. Its checksum hash changed, failing to match the original. The system, working silently in the background, had logged the discrepancy. A tiny green flag had appeared on a server dashboard that only Ben and a few others ever monitored. My alarm had worked. They were blind, deaf, and moving through a minefield they couldn't see. Day 10 brought an official email from HR, a formal, carefully worded letter from a senior vice president. It informed me that due to scheduling complexities, the internal review of my alleged insubordination would require an additional 5 business days to complete. I read the email and smiled. It was a classic corporate stall tactic, a bureaucratic sleight of hand. Elena was trying to control the timeline, to manage the narrative, to buy herself time to figure out how to bury my accusations and me along with them. She was moving pawns on a chessboard, completely unaware that my own clock, the one that truly mattered, was ticking down in a different game entirely. Her clock could be delayed. Mine was atomic. The hours ticked by. 11, 12, 13. On the final night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my small desk, my laptop open, a terminal window displaying a live feed of filtered network traffic. I had set up a quiet listener on a public access point I knew Elena used when she worked from her McMansion in Evergreen. A small vulnerability in her personal cybersecurity. It was a long shot, but desperate. Arrogant women get sloppy when they think they've already won. I watched the data scroll by, a cascade of meaningless digital chatter. The city lights outside my window blurred into a soft, unfocused glow. The clock on my laptop screen was a stark digital pulse. 23:45. 23:50. 23:55. Then at 23:58, 2 minutes before midnight, a new connection lit up on my screen, a VPN login. The connection was encrypted, but the IP address it originated from was not. It was a static IP, one I had already identified. It was registered to a small nondescript warehouse building on the industrial outskirts of Haven Ridge, the same warehouse that served as the physical shipping address for the UPS box used by all 12 of the shell companies. She was in the system late on the last night, likely doing her final cleanup, covering her tracks. And in her haste, in her arrogance, she had used her work VPN, creating a direct, irrefutable digital line from her own laptop to the central hub of her criminal enterprise. It was the final lock clicking into place, the keystone in the arch of evidence. I watched the clock tick over. 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 57 seconds. 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. Midnight. It was day 14 at 0:01 precisely. The server script I had embedded in the risk management software executed its primary command. The 14-day deferral period on my risk memorandum had expired. The conditions of the reverse exposure clause had been met. The process was entirely automated, a silent digital cascade. First, the script compiled the data package, my original memorandum, the full vendor analysis complete with EIN mismatches and the shared UPS box address, the $4.8 million revenue recognition report, the log gap analysis, a new file containing the evidence of the recent metadata tampering on the Apex invoice, a log of Elena's final damning VPN connection, complete with IP address and timestamp, 126 supporting files in total. Second, the script encrypted the package using a 256-bit AES protocol, rendering it a single impenetrable block of data. Third, the script initiated the distribution protocol. At 1 minute and 15 seconds, the first email was sent. The recipient was the secure private group address for the 3 members of the Evergreen Estates Audit Committee of the Board of Directors. The email was configured to bypass all spam filters and be flagged with the highest possible priority. It was time to arrive just as they were having their first sips of morning coffee in their home offices. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, 3 minutes and 15 seconds later, a second email was sent. This one went to the Senior Vice President of Claims at Evergreen's corporate liability insurer. The delay was intentional, ensuring the board members would see it first, giving them no time to coordinate a response before their own financial protection was officially put on notice. Simultaneously, the system alert containing the keywords reverse exposure clause was generated. Ben's webhook triggered silently. A blind carbon copy of the entire data package was forwarded to BL213 at proton.me in a quiet, secure office in downtown Claymont. A notification would appear in the inbox of Baker Lind, who were on a monthly retainer for exactly this kind of anonymous data drop. The machine had done its work. The bomb had been delivered. All that was left was to watch it go off. I slept for 4 hours. A deep and dreamless sleep. At 6 a.m. on day 14, I woke up, went for my run, and came home. I dressed in the same severe charcoal gray dress I had worn to the dinner at Canto, my armor. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I sent a polite professional email to HR. Subject: follow-up regarding suspension. Good morning, I wrote. As the initial period of my suspension has concluded, I would like to schedule a meeting to discuss my return to work plan and the resolution of the hostile environment claim. I am available to come in at 9:30 a.m. this morning. Please let me know which conference room would be suitable. I was not asking for permission. I was informing them of my arrival. I arrived at the Evergreen Estates Welcome Center at 9:25 a.m. I walked through the soaring marble lobby. My security badge, which they had forgotten to deactivate, granting me access through the turnstiles. The elevator ride up to the ground floor was silent. I was alone. I smoothed the front of my dress, my reflection, a cool gray ghost in the polished steel doors. The elevator slowed and the doors slid open with a soft chime. The scene before me was one of quiet pandemonium. No one was shouting. No one was running. But the entire office floor was gripped by a palpable electric panic. People were standing in small, stunned clusters, their faces pale, illuminated by the ghostly blue light of their phone screens. Others sat frozen at their desks, staring blankly at their monitors. The normal morning hum of productivity was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. Phones were being held, read, and then looked at again in disbelief. I saw my direct manager, a man who prided himself on his unflappable calm, standing by the window, his hand over his mouth, his face the color of ash. They had all received the news. The board had been notified. The insurer had been notified. The emails would be flying. The calls would be frantic. The carefully constructed facade of Evergreen Estates was cracking in real time, and they were all just staring at the fissures as they appeared. I stepped out of the elevator. My heels made no sound on the thick corporate carpet. No one looked up. No one noticed me. They were all trapped in their own private circles of digital hell. I walked straight ahead, my gaze fixed on the conference room at the far end of the floor. I did not look to the left. I did not look to the right. I walked a straight, clean line through the silent, unfolding chaos. I walked past the shocked faces, the glowing screens, the wreckage of their careers. I was the architect of this ruin, and I was walking through it without a scratch. I did not look back. The conference room on the second floor was a glass box of silent panic. Marshall Kincaid stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the community, but seeing nothing. Elena Voss sat ramrod straight at the long polished mahogany table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Warren Dale was slumped in a chair in the corner, his expensive suit looking rumpled and cheap, his face a mottled, unhealthy red. They had been summoned here an hour ago, and they were not allowed to leave. I stood at the head of the table, my laptop connected to the room's main projector. The far wall was dominated by a massive screen displaying a grid of 4 solemn faces. It was a Zoom call, but it had the gravity of a tribunal. The man in the top left square, a stern-faced individual with thinning gray hair, was Arthur Vance, the chairman of the audit committee. He was the one who had spoken. No one leaves the room. Vance's voice had boomed from the speakers, a disembodied voice of absolute authority. We are waiting for one more party to join the call. A new square appeared on the screen. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a severe black suit introduced herself. Amelia Shaw, outside counsel for Evergreen's liability insurer. Mr. Vance, we have received your committee's data package. We have reviewed it and we have a preliminary statement. She didn't wait for an invitation. Her voice was crisp, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. Our directors and officers policy contains a standard conduct exclusion clause. If a senior executive such as the HOA president is found to have had prior knowledge of material financial irregularities and willfully chose not to act upon that knowledge in a timely manner, the policy can be rendered null and void for all claims arising from that specific event. Our digital forensics team has already authenticated the system logs provided. We can confirm the existence of a formal risk memorandum submitted by an internal analyst, and we can confirm the log of its subsequent deferral by the President's office. The clock, as they say, started ticking at that moment. The blood drained from Marshall Kincaid's face. This was no longer about a few million in fudge numbers. It was about the entire financial safety net of the association's leadership being systematically dismantled. Amelia Shaw had just informed them in the politest terms possible that they were on their own. Vance's face was grim. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Ms. Ridley. You may proceed. I clicked the first slide. The screen behind me lit up. The title was simple. 2 words in a clean sans serif font. Vendor Nexus. The slide was a spiderweb diagram. In the center was a single bolded box. Haven Ridge Sourcing LLC. Branching out from it, Connected by sharp red lines were 12 other boxes: Apex Landscaping, Ridgeline Materials, Keystone Contracting, Summit Logistics, all of them. And from each of those 12 boxes, a smaller line connected to a summary of payments from Evergreen Estates. The total at the bottom of the screen, a staggering $11.7 million over 18 months. At the very bottom of the central box in small but clear type were the words, Registered Managing Agent, Warren Dale. A choked, strangled sound came from the corner of the room. Warren looked like he had been punched in the gut. Marshall swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. This is circumstantial, he stammered, turning to the screen. Warren Dale is a common name. This is an unfortunate coincidence. Nothing more. You can't prove this. This consultant, he gestured vaguely at Warren, is the same person. I didn't answer him. I simply clicked to the next slide. The screen was now filled with a single high-resolution photograph. It was the picture I had taken under the table at Canto. The restaurant's logo was clearly visible on the bill. The date was clearly visible, and the black corporate card used to pay for the meal was perfectly in focus. The name embossed on it was Haven Ridge Sourcing, the vendor in question, which has received over $2 million from Evergreen in the last quarter alone, paid for a dinner attended by myself, the treasurer, the president, and the consultant in question. I said, my voice even and calm. I clicked again. A second image appeared on the screen next to the first. It was a composite. On the left was the looping illegible scrawl from the delivery receipts for Apex Landscaping. On the right was the authenticated electronic signature of Warren Dale from his Evergreen consulting contract. They were identical. The digital and physical signatures match. The coincidence is no longer a coincidence. It's a conspiracy. The silence in the room was absolute. Marshall stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. He had no more deflections, no more corporate doublespeak. The data was clean, the connection absolute. I turned my attention away from the screen, away from the men, and looked directly at the one person who held the final key. Elena Voss. She hadn't moved. She was a statue of terrified composure. Elena, I said, my voice softening slightly, though it held no pity. During the dinner that night, I was instructed to make slight adjustments to revenue accruals. I refused. The next day, after a physical threat was made against me in the company parking garage, I was suspended for insubordination. But before my system access was revoked, I logged the instruction I had received. I deferred my own risk memorandum on your behalf. I paused, letting the words settle in the cold, still air. The system is very simple. It's a binary system. It only asks one question. I took a step closer to the table. My eyes locked on hers. In the last 14 days, did you, as HOA president, at any point enter the risk management system and actively delay or defer an open investigation into the vendor fraud and revenue recognition issues I formally presented to you? She stared back at me, her face a pale, unreadable mask. The seconds stretched on, each one a lifetime. She was calculating the odds, running through the scenarios, searching for an escape that did not exist. Her career was flashing before her eyes. From the screen, Arthur Vance's voice was a crack of thunder. Ms. Voss, this is not a deposition. This is a matter of fiduciary duty to this board and our homeowners. The insurer has the logs. We have the logs. We are merely asking for your confirmation. Answer Ms. Ridley's question. Yes or no? The ultimatum hung in the air. A guillotine blade poised over her neck. All eyes in the room and on the screen were on her. The weight of it all, the fraud, the cover-up, the impending collapse pressed down on her. Her perfect posture finally broke. Her shoulders slumped, a barely perceptible movement, but it was a total surrender. She closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, she looked at Vance on the screen. She gave a single tiny nod. A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the room. It was the sound of the void opening up, the sound of everything coming apart at the seams. It was the sound of guilt, confirmed and witnessed. Elena had sealed her own fate, and in doing so, she had sealed theirs. I turned back to my laptop and closed the presentation. The screen went black. I didn't need to say anything else. I didn't need to point fingers or raise my voice. The system I had built was designed to be its own prosecutor, its own judge and jury. My only job was to present the evidence it had gathered. The reverse exposure clause in the corporate governance policy, which was ratified last month, is fully automated, I said to the silent room. The moment Ms. Voss's deferral expired, the clause triggered. It sent everything you have now seen to the board, every homeowner, and the insurer. The distribution was executed at exactly 0:01 this morning. I looked at Marshall, then at Warren, and finally at Elena. My face was as impassive as the system I had created. I didn't need to do anything else. The aftermath was not a storm. It was a demolition. It was swift, precise, and brutally efficient. Before the Zoom call even disconnected, Arthur Vance, his face a granite mask on the screen, issued the first directives. Marshall, Elena, you are both suspended. Effective immediately, pending a full independent investigation by this committee and our outside counsel. You will surrender all association property. Your network access is terminated. Do not contact any Evergreen homeowners. We will be in touch. There was no room for argument. The sentence had been passed. In the corner of the room, two discreet security guards who had been waiting silently outside the door entered. They did not touch Warren. They didn't need to. They simply stood beside him, their presence a quiet, unmovable wall. One of them spoke, his voice low and devoid of inflection. Mr. Dale, we'll escort you from the building now. Warren's face, which had been a mask of rage, crumbled into a pasty, slack-jawed disbelief. The fight was gone. He was just a man in a rumpled suit being led away by two other men who were just doing their jobs. The collapse was quiet, undramatic, and absolute. Within the hour, the first dominoes began to fall outside the glass walls of the second floor. A press release, carefully worded by a crisis management firm that must have been on retainer, announced the temporary leave of the president and treasurer for personal reasons. Simultaneously, Evergreen's largest institutional homeowner group, a massive residents alliance, formally requested an emergency board meeting, their public statement citing deeply concerning governance issues. The insurer, seeing its chance to escape a 9-figure payout, invoked its rescission clause by offering their full and immediate cooperation with any potential state investigation. Evergreen, the association, could cauterize the wound. It was a standard corporate blood sacrifice by serving up the guilty executives. The association itself could plead ignorance and promise reform, saving itself from catastrophic fines and legal penalties. Marshall, Elena, and Warren were no longer assets. They were liabilities to be jettisoned. As I was packing my few personal items from my old cubicle on the ground floor, the head of human resources approached me. He was a nervous man named David who looked as if he had aged a decade in the last 2 hours. Tess, he began, his voice tentative. About your suspension. He wrung his hands. There's obviously been a significant misunderstanding. We'd like to formally rescind it. Of course. I didn't look up from my box. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 documents. I placed them on the desk. The first was the doctor's note diagnosing acute stress directly linked to a hostile work environment. The second was a printed timestamped still from the stairwell security footage. I was suspended 22 minutes after being physically threatened by an HOA consultant in a stairwell, I said. my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. My suspension was based on a fabricated complaint of insubordination designed to silence me before I could report a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. A misunderstanding is not the correct term. David paled, looking at the photo. What do you want? I want a formal written apology from this office on association letterhead for the retaliatory and baseless action taken against me. And I want it on my desk by the end of the day. I was not negotiating. I was stating a condition. He nodded quickly, a man desperate to make a problem disappear, and scurried away. An hour later, I was summoned to the second floor, the executive wing. I was shown not into an office, but into a small private library, all dark leather and the smell of old books. Evergreen's general counsel, a woman named Catherine Shaw, was waiting for me. She was in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen everything. She gestured for me to sit. Ms. Ridley, she began, getting straight to the point. You have in a single morning saved this association from one catastrophe while simultaneously plunging it into another. The board is impressed and terrified, which from a legal standpoint is the ideal state of mind for enacting change. She steepled her fingers. We are prepared to offer you a new position. We are creating it for you, Director of Internal Integrity. You would report directly to the Audit Committee, not to the Executive Board. You would be given full autonomy and the necessary budget to redesign and implement the vendor verification and internal control policies you've already drafted. Your salary would be triple your current compensation. It was the perfect association response. Absorb the threat. Promote the whistleblower. Make her a part of the system she had exposed, thereby neutralizing her as an outside agent. They were offering me a golden cage. I met her gaze. Thank you for the offer, Catherine. It's a good start. Her eyebrows raised slightly. A start. I have additional terms, I said. First, Evergreen will implement a comprehensive whistleblower protection program drafted by an outside firm specializing in employee rights, not by internal counsel. It will include absolute guarantees against retaliation. I leaned forward. Second, you will establish a fully anonymous third-party ethics and compliance hotline advertised in every office and on the community homepage. Homeowners need a safe channel to report misconduct without fear. And third, I added, delivering the final non-negotiable point. You will establish a corporate-funded, independently administered legal defense fund. Any homeowner who uses the hotline to report a verifiable claim and subsequently faces retaliation will be given immediate access to that fund to pursue legal action against the association or the individuals responsible. You have to give the system teeth. You have to make the risk of a cover-up more costly than the risk of exposure. Catherine Shaw stared at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. I had not asked for more money or a bigger office. I had asked for power to be permanently shifted away from the executive suite and into the hands of the homeowners. I had demanded that she arm the entire community with the same weapons I had been forced to build for myself. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. Your terms are accepted, Director. Back in the sterile quiet of my temporary office, my phone vibrated. It was an email from a number I had blocked, but the message still came through on my laptop. It was from my mother. The text was frantic, riddled with typos. What did you do? Tess? What did you do? Warren's work called. They're asking all these questions. People from the town are calling the house. You've ruined everything. I read the words. There was no concern for me. No question of what had happened. Just the reflexive, familiar accusation. You are the trouble. You are the problem. I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a profound, quiet emptiness where a sense of obligation used to be. I dragged the email to the trash. Then I created a filter to automatically delete any future messages from her address. I did not reply. A few minutes later, a text message from an unknown number 7 words. You will regret this. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. The venom was unmistakable. I took a screenshot, attached it to a new email, and sent it to the lawyer Baker Lind had assigned to me that afternoon. Subject: for your files. I deleted the text and blocked the number. It was no longer my threat to manage. It was evidence. At 5 o'clock, I packed my bag. The written apology from HR was on my desk as promised. I left it there. I rode the elevator down to the main lobby. The large digital directory by the security desk had already been updated. The executive names were gone, and under the new heading Office of Internal Integrity was my name, T. Ridley, Director, Floor 2. The elevator to my new floor was empty. The doors opened onto a quiet carpeted hallway. At the end was a single door with a frosted glass panel. There was no name on it yet. I walked up to it, my hand reaching for the cool steel handle. This was the door I needed, the one that was never locked from the inside, the one no one could ever close on me again. I pushed it open and walked into the quiet, empty office that I had built for myself. The auditorium on the ground floor was not a place for celebration. It was a space for managed association communication. The lighting was soft, the seating was comfortable, and the air was conditioned to a precise neutral temperature. It was a room designed to absorb shock, to soothe frayed nerves. Today, it was filled with the homeowners of Evergreen Estates, summoned for an all-hands town hall. They sat in a sea of quiet anxiety, their faces upturned, waiting for answers. Arthur Vance, the audit chair, had spoken first, his words clipped and reassuring, promising stability, a renewed commitment to transparency, and a future built on integrity. He spoke of the unfortunate but necessary leadership changes. He did not use words like fraud or crime. It was a masterclass in association damage control. Then he introduced me. And now, to speak about the new framework of controls that will safeguard our community's future, I'd like to introduce the new Director of Internal Integrity, Tess Ridley. Polite, hesitant applause rippled through the room as I walked to the podium. The wood was smooth and cool beneath my hands. The lights were warm on my face, not a harsh spotlight, but a gentle, pervasive brightness. I was not here to give a rousing speech. I was here as a symbol, the living embodiment of the new system, the proof that the institution could, in theory, correct itself. I looked out at the hundreds of faces, analysts, managers, assistants, homeowners. They were not my enemies. They were just people who had been living inside a compromised structure. People who had likely suspected things were wrong, but had no safe way to say so. As I arranged my notes, a soft vibration started in the pocket of my dress. My burner phone. I had forgotten to turn it off. I subtly glanced down at the podium, shielding the screen from view. A number I didn't recognize was on the screen, but I knew there are some connections that transcend caller ID. It was my mother finding a new number, making a last desperate attempt to breach the walls I had built. The vibration continued, a frantic buzzing plea against my leg. For a fleeting moment, an image flashed in my mind, the porch on Alder Street, the smell of wet grass, a dismissive smirk. We won't miss you. The phone kept ringing. Behind the curtain at the side of the stage, my new life was waiting. Out here under the lights was a ghost from the old one making one last demand for my attention. I did nothing. I did not reach for the phone. I did not silence it. I simply let it ring. A small secret drama playing out in the folds of my dress. I let the call go unanswered, letting the connection stretch and stretch until it finally snapped on its own. The buzzing stopped. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise it replaced. In the warm glow of the stage lights, that final severed tie turned to dust and blew away. The host, a man from the communications department, smiled at me. Director Ridley, Before you begin your presentation, do you have any words for the community? I looked up from my notes out at the sea of expectant faces. I saw the camera lens at the back of the room broadcasting this town hall to every evergreen homeowner across the app. My audience was not just the people in this room. It was every resident who had ever been told to look the other way, to not rock the boat. I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the vast auditorium. To anyone who has ever been told not to cause trouble, I said, pausing for a beat, letting the words hang in the air. I'm here to tell you that I caused the right kind. There was no applause. There was something better. A deep collective stillness. 1,000 small private moments of understanding rippling through the crowd. Heads nodded, shoulders relaxed. It was not a call to rebellion. It was a declaration of principle, a quiet promise that from now on the truth would have a dedicated office on the second floor. As I began my presentation detailing the new 3-tiered verification system and the whistleblower protections, a series of silent connected events were already in motion. Miles away at the security hub for the Evergreen Estates Welcome Center, a junior technician processed a termination order on his screen. Elena Voss's employee profile picture, a smug, self-satisfied image, was displayed next to a large red button that read, "Deactivate." The technician clicked it. In the lobby downstairs, had Elena tried to enter, the electronic turnstile would have met her ID badge not with a welcoming green click, but with a flashing red light and the stark, impersonal words, "Access denied." Her key to the kingdom had been revoked. Later that afternoon, back in my new office, the email I had demanded was waiting in my inbox. The subject line was, "Formal apology." I opened it. It was a masterpiece of legal caution, full of phrases like, "regret any misinterpretation," an unfortunate series of events. It did not admit fault, but it served its purpose. It was a document of surrender. I read it once, then typed a one-word reply, "Received." I did not write thank you. I did not write accepted. It was not an apology I was accepting. It was a receipt for a debt that had been paid in full. The transaction was complete. I closed the email and moved it to a secure archive folder, a final entry in a long and painful ledger. That evening, the office was quiet. The sky outside my window was a deep bruised purple. I took out the one personal item I had brought with me, the small black hardbound notebook, my book of receipts. I opened it to the first page. I had never written on it, but it held a memory more vivid than any ink. This was the page that represented the beginning, the cold Monday morning on Alder Street. It represented the jammed wheel of my suitcase, the smell of my mother's perfume, the weight of a key placed on a railing. It held the ghost of her smirk, and the echo of her final words to me, the source code of my entire mission. My fingers were steady as I gripped the top corner of the page with a single, clean motion. I tore it from the book. The sound of the paper ripping was a sharp, satisfying finality in the quiet room. I didn't shred it or burn it. I simply folded the small blank page in half and then in half again and dropped it into the wastebasket. I was not destroying the past. I was just letting it go. The rest of the book, the data, the evidence, the cold, hard facts I kept. It was a tool, a weapon, a reminder. But the first page, the page that held the pain, was gone. I closed the notebook. The hard cover made a soft, definitive thud as it shut. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the community lights, a galaxy of possibilities. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I took a full deep breath. It was a breath that started somewhere deep in my gut and filled my lungs completely. A breath that wasn't shallow with anxiety or constricted by fear. It was not a breath of forgiveness, for some things are unforgivable. It was not a breath of triumph. It was a breath of freedom, a quiet, simple, and profound release. The weight was gone. The lights of the community glittered. And the night was just beginning.